everyone give me another 10 seconds countdown? Yep. Good afternoon from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and welcome to the inaugural Bernama webinar on COVID-19, New Norms for Journalists, a Regional Perspective. My name is Tamina Kausji and I will be your host and moderator for this entire exciting session. Ladies and gentlemen, for us as journalists and media practitioners, 2020 has proven to be the fourth estate's most tumultuous year yet. The COVID-19 pandemic has challenged what we knew to be established international and immovable pillars of the industry with new norms that were previously unimaginable. Journalism, in essence, is an unwavering commitment to provide our public with facts and perspectives they need in order to make sense of the world and act or react in their best interests in both the best and the worst of times. So, on today's webinar sessions, we delve into how exactly regional media practitioners have coped with and continued their essential work during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, lockdowns and reopenings. So, over the span of 3 sessions, we highlight Malaysia's success story, challenges in reporting and lessons learned, closing with educating the public and battling fake news through up-close sessions, Q&As and audience questions with this exemplary lineup of panelists. Joining us soon will be Bu Sulin, Code Blue Malaysia's Editor-in-Chief, followed by Anuradha Raghu, Bloomberg News journalist, as well as Dr. Lau Hancher, who is Corona Tracker's founder and chief data scientist, followed by Matthew Tosteven, Reuters Southeast Asia editor, and Desi Anwar, CNN Indonesia's director and senior anchor. Once again, I'm Tamina Kausji, your host and moderator for today's sessions, coming to you live from the Wisma Bernama studios in the heart of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. We thank you all for joining us, especially our live webinar participants. Hello to all of you, with journalists as well as media practitioners from around the region, including even the Philippines. So without further ado, we move into the first session. And as a little background, the first session for today features Malaysia's COVID-19 stories, successes, challenges, and everything in between for the country of 32.7 million people with close to 9,000 COVID-19 infections and 123 fatalities. Measures were taken to control the spread, including partial lockdowns or movement control orders, which began all the way in March 18th. And it is continuing on together with a conditional MCO that came into effect May the 4th till August the 31st to restart the economy. All of this has, to a certain extent, flattened the curve and broken the chain of infections. But now, with the recovery MCO moving into its last month, there are concerns the public have been letting their guard down. In this Bernama webinar session, the speaker will share Malaysia's story so far and the road ahead for COVID-19 recovery. Allow me to introduce the speaker. Bu Sulin is Editor-in-Chief with Code Blue, a health news website based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, reporting on healthcare issues and policies in Malaysia and around the world. Ms. Bu has 10 years experience in the journalism arena and also co-founded Code Blue in 2019, which seeks to promote healthcare as a human right. Let's bring in Bu Sulin now on the screen to share her
symptoms, what are COVID symptoms here in Malaysia. And the MOH says that 1 out of 5 COVID patients in Malaysia are children aged below 18. Pregnant women, what is the data on pregnant women with COVID like in Malaysia? And also more importantly, has there been any change since 120 days of the COVID outbreak here in Malaysia? In the US, they have reported an average age drop in July by 15 years. So they're seeing more and more people in their 20s and 30s now getting infected. And deaths. What are the details on deaths in this country? So when we talk about travel bubbles, you can see here UK's travel bubble, the EU, and Thailand. So you can see that Malaysia is not listed in any of these travel bubbles. UK here lists Vietnam, EU lists Thailand. Thailand may have a travel bubble later this year, but news reports have not cited Malaysia in it. And Singapore is opening up from August 10th to Malaysia for essential business, residents with long-term business and work passes. So the question is, why is Malaysia missing from the bubbles? And why is it taking so long for Singapore to open up their borders to us? So is Malaysia prepared for a third wave? We're currently in the second wave. The first wave in Malaysia came from imported China infections. The second wave is right now, which came after the Tabligh cluster hit us in March. I would say that we are actually pretty well prepared for a third wave. I don't foresee a second lockdown because the first lockdown really, we spent all our financial reserves on the first lockdown. The Prime Minister said the MCO cost the country 2 billion ringgit a day. Our unemployment rate shot up to 5.3% in May, and there are some 826,000 jobless people. We're facing now, unfortunately, caution fatigue. So it means that people aren't very careful anymore about following SOPs like washing their hands frequently or wearing a mask when they go outside. We have to find another way to encourage people to follow the SOPs because the virus doesn't care what you did last month, what you did 10 days ago, or even yesterday. The virus just cares about what you do today. So if fear is no longer a motivator for us, then we have to find a way to encourage people to follow the SOPs, maybe by civic consciousness, reminding them to care for their loved ones. And that's about it.
All right.
Yeah,
Thank you
that's
so
my
much,
presentation.
Sulin. Thank you so much, Sulin, for that. Now, moving into a couple of quick questions for you. So I think that was very comprehensive overall, but I'd like to ask you from a health news perspective, what have been the challenges in addressing the proliferation of fake news, especially medical myths and, snake oil treatments in the health arena during the pandemic? Over to you, Sulin.
Okay, so in a pandemic like this, we have seen quite a lot of fake news going around, not just what the authorities are supposedly doing or not doing, but also we see things like miracle cures or even what's happening in Malaysia right now. We do see some places having things like disinfection boxes, or we have some businesses claiming that they'll spray you with this thing to disinfect you, and then you ask them what is in it, and they just say it's just chemicals that are actually meant to be cleaning chemicals, like cleaning surfaces and not disinfecting the virus from your body. It is quite challenging, Tamina, because I think one reason is that we in Malaysia, and I'm sure around the world, we don't just read news in Malaysia, right? Because COVID is a global pandemic. So we have access to so many news sources beyond the Malaysian media. And it is challenging when some people, maybe the older folk, they tend to rely on not so reliable news sources. And I'm not just talking about Malaysian, what's going around in Malaysia WhatsApp groups, but even stuff from other countries as well, which is not verified. So how do we tackle that? I mean, I think we just have to remind our family and friends to only look at credible sources. That means mainstream news websites. In Malaysia, we can really tell people to get official information from the Ministry of Health's website, from the Defense Ministry's website and official social media pages. And if you want to get like medical information on the virus and what's going on, about looking for a vaccine or medicine, symptoms that are popping up now. For international news websites, I find New York Times, Stat News. Stat News is a US medical website. The Guardian. These are very good, credible sites that are helpful to inform you on what's going on.
That's right. Now let's talk a little bit about travel bubbles and the fact that you did point out Malaysia has not been included. And particularly looking at how important it is for restart the tourism-related economy worth almost 42 billion ringgit in 2019. From a health and testing perspective, could you share with us a couple of Code Blue's thoughts on how we could actually push forth for Malaysia to also be included in the tourism bubbles, not just us allowing tourists in from other countries?
No, yeah, that's a very good question, Tamina. I'm also not sure why we're not included in some of those regional travel bubbles. I mean, I think that Malaysia is doing great. I think we have handled the pandemic quite well with the limited resources that we have. So I don't know if it's because the international community doesn't trust our official figures and why. I mean, this is something the government has to answer. Because it's not enough if I think that we are doing great. The international community also has to believe the same. I mean, you can tell that there is a lack of highlights of Malaysia as a success story in international media. International media, they like to quote good examples of like Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong, even Vietnam, Thailand, but somehow Malaysia is not there, and I don't know why. So I think maybe one of the things that the government can do to persuade the international community to accept us is that perhaps we can release a little bit more information about the outbreak here. Like what I mentioned earlier about some of the testing issues that we have, the lack of information on that. So I think maybe if we were to release that, then we can show the world that, hey, we are doing pretty good and this is what we've been testing so far and the results, and let it speak for itself.
That's right. Thank you so much, Sulin, and thank you for taking the time. We'll speak to you again towards the end of the entire webinar during the audience Q&A session. And I'd also like to encourage all of you watching to be sending in your questions. We will be putting them forth for the panelists. We now move on to session 2, Challenges in Reporting and Lessons Learned. Now, did you know the Geneva-based Press Emblem Campaign, or PEC, tracking confirmed COVID-19 related deaths among journalists globally tracked 64 deaths in 24 countries as of 5th of May 2020. And according to UNESCO, the impact of COVID-19 may pose an existential threat to journalism. Our next speaker shares her views on the COVID-19 pandemic's challenges in terms of news reporting. Journalists globally have been braving grave personal risks to report on the pandemic and keeping the public informed, ensuring that personal safety of journalists and numerous techniques for physically distant or virtual reporting have taken center stage during this pandemic. Our next speaker is Anuradha Raghu, who is a news journalist with Bloomberg News. She has over 10 years' experience reporting on commodities, financial, economic, and political news. Currently based in Kuala Lumpur, she's extensively reported on the pandemic's wide-ranging impact on global food supply chains, changing consumer trends, market volatility, glove-making companies, and the shortage of migrant labor in plantations. We move it over now to Anuradha. Over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tamina. Now let me just get started by sharing my screen. Alright, just give me a second here. Alright, so just checking, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can. Perfect.
Okay.
Go ahead, Anuradha. Thank you.
All right. So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning into my session. As Tamina mentioned, I'm Anuradha. I'm a journalist with Bloomberg News based in Kuala Lumpur. So today, I'll be talking about the challenges reporting during the COVID-19 pandemic and the key takeaways from it. So here's a brief summary of what we'll cover today. We'll be exploring the multiple risks and challenges that journalists faced and continue to face when covering the coronavirus outbreak, as well as how this pandemic changed the way we gather and report news. We'll then take a look at remote journalism, including work from home struggles, and finally, address issues like well being, health, and safety of journalists, as well as long term resilience. So, this is a map tracking the coronavirus around the world. Would anyone here have believed these numbers 6 or 7 months ago? I definitely wouldn't have. But more than just the infections, COVID-19 has displaced newsrooms globally, including at Bloomberg. The first 6 months of 2020 has truly been an unprecedented time in the way news is produced and consumed. So let's address the challenges. One of the biggest challenge as a journalist is the risk of infection. We're out there on the scene, either interviewing or filming, we're going to press conferences, meeting government or company officials. All this puts us at a risk of contracting the virus, and it also puts our families at risk. Malaysia then put in place the movement control order on March 18, and it was a great step to curb the outbreak and flatten the curve, as you can see in this chart below here. The red dotted line is March 18, and you can see how the infections have fared since then. But the MCO also made news gathering more complicated. Any journalist will tell you that traveling is a big part of news gathering. But now newsmakers are quarantined at home, offices are shut, and there were roadblocks everywhere that made it really hard to travel anywhere. These travel restrictions were not only in Malaysia but also globally. That resulted in many conferences getting cancelled. For example, on the commodity side, the Bursa Malaysia Palm Oil Conference in March, which is the biggest palm oil conference in the world, was postponed and then cancelled. The Asia Cocoa Conference in Singapore was scrapped, and many other industry events were either postponed or cancelled. And this matters because these conferences are crucial for networking. It's where we as journalists meet industry officials, company executives, traders, sources, and it's how we build contacts as well. The lockdown also meant limited access to media briefings. In many places, the new restrictions meant it's now harder to get photo and video footage. News is a business of getting information, whether from statements or people. So, not being able to meet people or be at a press conference to ask your question is definitely a challenge that many journalists faced. There are virtual press conferences, but they're mostly one way and do not work as well because they limit the breadth and the depth of the information you can put in a story. There are media statements, of course, but just like one way press briefings, they cannot fully replace on the ground reporting or asking our own questions or doing our own checks. At the end of the day, journalists don't want to be just monkeys regurgitating statements or end up as a PR news wire that's only reporting what's handed to us. Now, moving on to the now infamous WFH. Many news organizations have implemented work from home policies. Bloomberg, for example, took regional chunks of its newsroom operations into work from home mode from mid March. And for the KL office, it was just a couple of days before Malaysia's MCO, which means I've been working from my dining table for the past 4 months. Now, a big challenge in this is balancing work and family and taking care of your mental health, which I'll address later on. There are also issues with connectivity, like your internet or laptop doesn't work as well compared to in the office, or not being able to get office supplies like stationery, printer, getting access to your printer, or even your recorder batteries. And because you're at home, you have to make sure your child or your cat doesn't sit at your laptop and accidentally send out stories. But we also have to acknowledge the challenging economic situation during these trying times. In the recent months, Publications have shut or stopped their print editions for various reasons, and many journalists have lost their jobs. The news consumption is actually higher, with people sitting at home and watching more TV, and more people turning to online news outlets for information about the coronavirus. But COVID is a double edged sword for news outlets. On one hand, online subscription media could benefit if people stuck at home start paying to get access. On the other hand, publishers that are funded by advertising are encountering new challenges. Recent reports show that advertising revenue has collapsed, and local newspapers that rely on businesses for ads are struggling even more. Now that's because companies are cutting marketing budgets and pulling ads because they're having tougher times. So some newspaper websites are seeing record readership levels, but very little income. For now, it's very difficult to say what the long term impacts of COVID-19 will be on the media industry because nobody really knows when exactly things are going to return to normal. So, I mentioned how news consumption actually increased in the past few months. The virus outbreak and the far reaching implications made markets very volatile. Companies were rushing to react to the outbreak and lockdowns because their businesses were affected, and people wanted to get updates on the virus, what's happening in Malaysia, in Asia, and across the world. For Bloomberg, we had record breaking web traffic in Asia, and subscription growth was strong. Market stories were consistently the best regional performers in converting casual readers into paying ones. I'll give you an example. If you can just take a look at these charts, this chart right over here. This one is palm oil prices on Bursa Malaysia. Now, I'm showing you this because palm oil is the world's most consumed edible oil, and an interesting reflection on markets, and also because the global benchmark are the Malaysian prices. So take a look at this green circle right over here. It's just around January. That was when palm oil was on a fantastic rally, and then suddenly, bam, the pandemic hits, prices crash, and the market goes into a frenzy and hit multi-year lows, all in the same year. Compared to the price range in 2019 and 2018, well, palm is just one example of a commodity that was wildly volatile, and people wanted to know how the market was behaving. A second example is the huge increase in trading on the Bursa Malaysia stock market. There's just so much company news. People are trying to make money or trying not to lose money. And you have people stuck at home who now want to invest in the stock market. So that data here is actually up to July, and you can see the record high trading volumes, higher than anything we've seen in the past. And finally, there's the battle with fake news. With the fear and uncertainty around the pandemic, we saw a surge in fake news and rumors. Fake WhatsApp messages of this place getting contaminated or that person getting COVID. Now, the Health Ministry and National Security Council has been doing a fantastic job in dispelling a lot of these fake news. But for journalists, more fake news means more work that goes into fact checking. And there's still a lot of onus on us to make sure what we put out is credible and factual. And there's a lot of shoe leather journalism involved. There's another session on fake news by the other panelists, so please stay tuned for that. Now, let's move into how journalists are adapting to the challenges I talked about and how we're reimagining news reporting in this digital age. I talked a little about working from home, which is essentially transforming newsrooms to enable remote working and mobile journalism so that the news flow doesn't just stop because there's a lockdown and your reporters are at home. So using Bloomberg as an example here, we've always had some version of the remote newsroom in some part of the world, like our colleagues in Myanmar that already work from home because we have no physical office presence there. Plus, we're a global newsroom and have managers that manage teams across the region and the world, so we're used to working with colleagues remotely. As we discovered during this pandemic, it was possible to move the entire newsroom to work from home mode, and our robust technology and incredible support teams allowed us to do that with a few adjustments to our work processes. As for not being able to attend physical press conferences, actually, many ministries, government agencies, companies, and even the central bank now offer virtual press briefings. Analyst and company quarterly briefings are now done via webinar, such as Top Glove, Prime Darby, and FGV. And we can stream and watch events via Facebook Live instead of attending it. Ultimately, journalists are problem solvers, and we need to learn how to improvise, adapt, and overcome. COVID 19 has, in a way, made us more creative in finding new ways to break news, cover events, and connect with sources. We know that not being physically present in certain places means that we'll be slower in getting the news. But there are always other ways to get the news out in a more accurate and comprehensive way.
Is
The
Dr.
current
Lau
situation
waiting?
is also an opportunity to develop tools that can help us in the digital sphere. For example, Bloomberg has in-house software that our R&D team develops, which helps journalists sift through thousands of Twitter posts to give us a heads up when of something that might be developing or spotting new trends that can be turned into a story. In my own experience, I found that the coronavirus coverage led to increased communication with my colleagues around the world. I was working alongside my colleagues in the Americas and in Europe to produce global team pandemic stories such as food supply chain disruptions, farmers dumping vegetables, new viral trends, and such. So I mentioned improvising and collaborating, and that news consumption has increased, and that's actually an opportunity to find new ways or new formats to tell the story. Across our newsrooms, we've tried to cut back on the story length because, frankly, not everyone wants to read a long, boring story about a stock or a plantation. Now, and the pandemic has also created so much opportunity for news that would, in normal circumstances, not be as exciting. Now, here's some examples I like to share, and just this disclaimer: there are actually really there are a lot of other really good stories out there, but I've chosen the ones that I either wrote or edited just so I can explain the story's background a little bit better. For example, this condom story on the top right. It was just from a simple interview with a major condom factory in Johor. But we cut through the noise and went with the most important thing in the headline. And the story ended up getting a lot of attention with over 3.4 million web page views as of June. I talked about spotting new trends. So if you look at the bottom left, you have a business take on the Dalgona coffee craze. And next to it is a labor shortage story that became very relevant because of the virus outbreak. Also, just a few more examples. A lot of us use e-commerce platforms like Lazada to buy vegetables during the MCO. So this story was actually a collaboration with our startups reporter in Singapore to take it more on a business view. We also did on the top right, a Bloomberg Magazine feature about Malaysia's incredible glove industry, which did really well with global readers. And speaking of new formats, we've had a coronavirus quiz for our readers. So, like many white collar workers, journalists everywhere got a crash course on the pitfalls and benefits of working from home. Essentially, the debate over whether employees perform as well at the kitchen table compared to the office table has been around ever since technology first made such a shift possible. For many journalists, the lockdown gave people a chance to reimagine their work life balance. Many reporters, including myself, discovered that ditching the long commute to work increased productivity, lowered stress, and gave me an opportunity to spend more time with my family and my dog. I could do virtual interviews with people in different time zones, which was previously not a norm, and it allowed me to produce shorter but more impactful stories. But it is harder to do some things remotely, and we've had to work harder and do more prep work because simple things now take more time. For example, in the newsroom bureau, you can quickly huddle around the table for a story discussion or just bounce off ideas. But now we have to set up multiple conference calls just to achieve the same result. And in some countries like Indonesia or Philippines, home internet and even electricity is often not as good as in fully set up offices in Jakarta or Manila. So things can take longer, connections can fail, those kind of things. There are also other challenges like not getting your questions answered, the missed opportunity for that face to face networking, and the risk of burnout. So we've come to the last part of my presentation, which is the key takeaway and lessons that we journalists and media organizations have learned. This includes how we deal with work from home struggles, as well as the well being, safety, and long term resilience for journalists covering the pandemic. I've separated this into three parts. First is on an individual basis. As a news organization, ensuring the well being and safety of journalists is extremely important. At Bloomberg, we had the global shift to work from home because the company did not want to put any employee at risk. And it also provided a lot of technical support to enable that shift to happen. Some bureaus have reopened since then, but many of us are still under work from home. And we're also very selective about staffing a briefing or even meeting contacts just to keep reporters safe. I'd also like to talk about flexibility and easing pressure on journalists. It's important to remember that each of us has experienced this global quarantine in different ways, whether due to local measure, family dynamics, or international guidelines. Our bosses at Bloomberg, I think, did a good job in conveying that we're not expected to be doing the same as in the office. So there was a very top down approach in that. There was also a concerted effort by managers to check in on people to see how they're doing and to make sure that we understand that it's harder to work from home and we all have home and family things to deal with. Or if you live alone and you're feeling isolated, shutting off is one of the things that I myself personally struggled with. And my bureau chief, who was in Jakarta at the time, as well as my team leader in Tokyo, would remind me to log off, get rest, and take care of my health. Ultimately, the main takeaway from this pandemic is that a person's mental health is indicative of how well they're going to perform. It's not about chasing people to make them more productive, but understanding that people have different struggles. And as for long term resilience, we need to be working towards building capability around resilience. For example, Bloomberg has initiatives to help people maximize their productivity during this work from home period, and then once back in the office, help reporters to ramp back up. On a wider team based, it's important, I think, to encourage people to connect and collaborate. Now, Bloomberg has done that, I think, with regional informal bureau chats as well as sharing session with your regional peers. We've also organized online sessions on meditation, yoga, work from home exercises. There was group dancing, and my favorite, we organized a comedy show to keep us entertained, and we hired a comedian for that. On a wider community effort, I'd just like to share a little bit on this. So Bloomberg Philanthropies has donated about 331 million US dollars to support the fight against COVID. And in Asia Pacific, we've organized a hygiene kit challenge where reporters can assemble kits for people to meet them as a way of giving back. And we also have virtual mentoring programs in India and provide support to local food banks. So that's the end of my presentation. And if you have any questions, you can contact me at my email or via Twitter. Thank you very much, and back to you, Tamina.
Thanks a lot, Anuradha. Now, I've got a couple of questions for you. On the positive side of things, though, how has journalists' mental health also, while reporting and working from home during the pandemic, become a core issue that news organizations, including Bloomberg, have been addressing very actionably?
Okay, so I'm sorry if I couldn't hear the full question because it's raining quite heavily here, but I think you were asking about mental health and why is it so important in terms of what Bloomberg is addressing.
That's right.
So as I mentioned, the key takeaway is that you need to be able to take care of your employees' mental health if you want them to keep performing. So it's not about harassing people to meet deadlines or expecting them to adhere to the same productivity levels as they would in a normal office situation. So no matter how hardworking or ambitious someone is, they can't do the job if they don't feel safe or they're too tired from juggling work and family. For example, I have an editor in Sydney who had days where she just couldn't concentrate because she had to watch her toddler, her child, and she couldn't get work done. And that's okay because no one can be turned on all the time. I think Bloomberg has done well in paying attention to the well being and mental health of journalists. and ensuring that they have the right support, both technical wise as well as personal and mental support. We have, for example, daily calls not just to discuss work, but to check up on how each other are doing. And as I mentioned, we have those informal, fun online sessions that we can all participate with and just let our hair down.
That's right. Thanks, Anuradha, for that. And also, how have digital platforms like Bloomberg in particular been focusing on monetization in light of the fact that news consumption has actually gone up, has increased exponentially with people staying at home, working from home, and also consuming a lot more news media, particularly with regards to health, entertainment, even education?
Sorry, once again, I'm trying my best to catch your question. I think you mentioned about digital subscriptions and
That's right.
monetizing it. Okay. So basically, let me just share with you. So from what we realize, financial journalism is an area where the value of good journalism where good journalism can provide is becoming greater and greater, especially as our economies in this region develop. And the growing middle class means that more people have more income to invest. So in Asia in particular, there's a great demand for coverage of this region, including digital news that is set to be an even bigger driver of global growth in the coming years. So we have a fast-growing digital subscription business for the web audience, and so now we have, for example, to keep up with that, we now have a decent digital team, for example, where years ago we had none of that before, just to meet the needs of our digital audience. And the team works hand in hand with our broader newsroom, so we can meet the needs of the readers and the audience across our different platforms of print, TV, radio, web, and magazines. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much, Anuradha. And everybody watching us and joining us, do send in your questions regarding any of the sessions. At the end of the entire webinar, we've allocated some time for our speakers to address them. Moving into the final session of today's webinar on COVID-19, New Norms for Journalists, a Regional Perspective. And arguably, this is the one that's been ensuring sleepless nights for journalists and newsrooms throughout the pandemic. Yes, I'm talking about the next session, which is all about educating the public and battling fake news. Now, heavy social media consumption during the COVID-19 lockdowns and general concerns about health and safety issues has led to sky-high concerns about misinformation, with Facebook and WhatsApp seen as the main channels for spreading so-called fake news about COVID-19. At the same time, media organizations are increasingly strapped for resources, confronted with public mistrust, combating fake news while striving to uphold editorial standards. The three speakers for this session will, in turn, discuss perspectives on how social media has disrupted content and communication and their organization's roles in upholding ethical, timely news reporting and data collation. First up, we have Dr. Lau Han, Corona Tracker founder and chief data scientist. He holds a PhD in artificial intelligence, specializing in natural language processing. He's spoken at events for Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and trained data scientists and engineers for organizations like Intel, IBM, OCBC, Shell, and etc. Over to you now, Dr. Han.
All right, thank you very much. So let me share my screen. Okay, can everybody see my slides?
Yes, we see them clear.
Okay, all right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Lau here. Today I'm going to talk about data science, artificial intelligence, but don't worry, there's nothing too technical here. But basically look at how we have came so far by using Corona Tracker, a platform that helps us to collect data and using that to combat COVID-19. Now, it all started on the 25th of January 2020. If everybody still remember, it was about Chinese New Year Eve at that time. So we sort of know that there's this virus that came about. So my friends family, they all shared pictures about this. So they say a lot of people tell us that that this deadly virus going around in China, and they call it, back then we don't have a proper name yet, right? We call it the Wuhan virus. So people were wondering like, what is that? And a lot of my friends will start to ask me about, hey, Dr. Lau, have you got any information about this? What do you think about that? At that time, if I'm not mistaken, Malaysia only have one or two cases, and they are still imported cases, and majority of the cases, like 7,000-8,000 cases, they're all around in China. So the first questions that people want to know is, what is the situation right now? And if you go to Google, right, and they basically very fragmented information, and even like the major news outlet that our friends, journalist friends, have shared earlier, we can't really find out too much information from news outlets either. But at the same time, right, a lot of people are sharing information on WhatsApp groups about, there are people who got infected at particular areas, particular tamans, and then precautions, and they all sound alike, and they all started with a similar picture. So that's the problem. A bit of disclaimer here is that when I started Corona Tracker, we don't aim to be a fake news combat. There was sort of like a secondary use of Corona Tracker, because it's not a good thing to go around and tell your friends or families, relatives, during a festive season, say, hey, there's a fake news. But we always want them to verify and check the news sources before they share. So, and the only information source that we have at the time is this particular map from JHU, Johns Hopkins University. And there are a couple of problems with that. Number one is we are unable to drill down for further detail. It's basically you just see a map with a lot of, not really that many red bubbles, basically around China, right? And the problem with map is that when there are too little cases, it doesn't seem to tell you too much of it. And right now, if you open this map again, the whole world is red. It's just different tone of red, different shades. So what does it mean, right? It doesn't tell you too much if you want to find out more information about that. And second thing is, as a data scientist, as a data analyst, a lot of people, they want to gain access to more data for analysis. And to be frank, a lot of Department of Health or Ministry of Health around the world, they don't have that sort of information either, right? They probably have it for their own country, like Malaysia, we have it for our own country, but for the rest of the world, 194 countries, we don't have access to that information, or we don't have reliable access to that level of information. You'll be surprised, right? And last but not least is, a lot of people, they want to keep track of the verified stories. Now, right now, we are at the stage that a lot of people are kind of fatigued, like Surin said, right? They're caution fatigue. Yeah. I still remember that when we hit the first 10,000 or the first 100,000, the Facebook feed is full of news and messages and statuses about that. But when we hit 10 million, or when we hit past 1 million, 5 million marks, the attention goes down exponentially. So that's also one of the problems. So the key here is we need a better system. So that's what motivates us to build the Corona Tracker. And when we first built Corona Tracker, we have three things in mind. Number one is we want to make sure that the information is there, very easily available for the public. So we want to make sure that the statistic is always there. And number two is we want to make sure that we are able to keep track of news articles from different sources. And we only show news articles from trusted sources, verified sources, like CNN, Bloomberg, Reuters. And last but not least, we want to also allow people from every country to be able to keep track of the development in their own country. And these are the three main components that you can find from Corona Tracker. And so who uses Corona Tracker? You might be thinking like, okay, this is pretty interesting. It's all about data and numbers. But if you are not a data scientist, if you are not a data analyst, what else can you do with that? But in fact, a lot of people from different countries, right? We have scaled to 195 different countries. So we have users from all around the world, and they are available in 26 different languages and dialects. So this is one of the things that we make sure nobody is left out. We try to translate with the help of volunteers and community to help us to translate into different languages, different dialects, like for example, Philippines and Indonesians, Bahasa. And right now we have 12 million active users, and we have about 70 million views. So this number is quite. I wouldn't call it impressive myself, but it's definitely beyond my expectation. It's totally different level from when I first started. So our main users actually come from different countries. Like our top users come from India and of course Malaysia. But we know that most of the attendants here, most of the attendees here, or audience today, you might have other preference, right? Because when you want hyperlocal information, you might go to websites like outbreak.com, for example. And we have users from Egypt, US, Philippines, and the other parts of the world as well. And how did Corona Tracker scale, right? So this is one of the key reasons is that when we want to make sure that the data is, how can this information be spread and be accessible to as many people? So a lot of the news outlets actually approach us, for example, News Straits Times, Berita Harian, and I think Malay Mail as well, and a couple of news websites. They actually embed our data, so they link directly to our servers, and we have it in other countries as well, like Brazilian reports, Doc to Us. So different types of website, different types of media they use as also, not only the official media. But of course, the life is not always a bed of roses. We do have our road bumps. Like in this particular case, right? When we first started, we posted 2 cases or 3 cases about this country called Seychelles, and then their ministry is very unhappy about that for some reason. Okay, for some reason we did not pursue and we did not investigate. So they attack us on social medias, and then they keep saying that Corona Tracker is a fake website. You guys shouldn't visit that. But because of the power of social media's power of crowdsourcing, we do have a lot of people from Cheshire come to our community and Telegram group asking us that, hey, how come you guys reported 2 cases and then you suddenly remove the numbers to zero? And they themselves went and pursued that matter for us. And after that, they join us and eventually they say that, hey, you know what? Now we have 4 confirmed cases in da 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 da, and the rest is history. So this is one of the success story. And Egypt government actually use our data directly as part of their operations, their daily operations. Okay, so what sort of problem did Corona Tracker actually solve? Not just from a technical standpoint or not just from a data standpoint, right? Everybody is talking about data science, machine learning, AI. Apart from the just being a buzzword, but what sort of actual problems we really solve other than playing Go chess, for example? We focus on 3 things in Corona Tracker. Number one is the access of dashboard. So we want to make sure that everybody, all right, who wants to know more about coronavirus, who wants to know more about COVID-19, can come to our website and gain access to the dashboard. Number two is for technical people, we want to make sure that this data is, we give them open access. So what we do is we provide an API. So it's a common, I would say, common standards for websites and mobile applications to exchange information. And also we make sure that the entire project is fully open source. Yeah, so there's no monetary sponsorship. There are sponsorships from the infrastructure side, but we don't take any money or any sort of funding per se. And last but not least is we're tackling a very unique problem here is that there are a lot of dashboard, a lot of coronavirus, corona tracker out there, but we are the only one that focus on analyzing unstructured data as well. Analyzing number is easy, not much fun, right? But analyzing unstructured data is super difficult. And so these are the dashboards. So individual countries, that they have their own URL. For example, if you want to know more about Russia, you can go to coronatracker.com/country/Russia, Australia, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, etc. And open API access, we have a well-documented backend. This is mainly for the machines to understand, so that if there's any robots or crawlers that come to our website, they are able to get the information instantly they want. I wouldn't say our website is real-time because it's almost impossible to capture all the information real-time, but I would say it's very close, it's near real-time. And unstructured data. So we analyze all sort of news articles, information from different websites, not just news outlets, social media, and also we have tweets and also the travel alerts as well. So during the peak seasons, I think April and May, late March to April, late March to April, this part of travel information, travel alerts actually help a lot of people. So what's next for Corona Tracker? And we have gotten a good head start. So we wanted this to be something that the public can continue and carry out with the work. And it shouldn't just be myself and the core team members. We are all volunteers anyway. So the first thing that we do is we publish a paper at WHO. So we talk about how we build the entire systems, the technical details, our methodologies, and you can take a look at this paper, and also the different analysis that we have done. And also we have another website called COVID-19ai.org, which is the next stage, the initiative that we collaborated with Microsoft with their help of sponsoring the Azure platform. So what we are going to do is we are going to build COVID-19 AI platform to tackle the three problems after the coronavirus, after the COVID-19. So in case, all right, we did not manage to get into like the third phase, okay, which is a good news, right? So right now I consider we are sort of like entering the second phase if we are not careful. So what should we do after this apart from and especially when we want to avoid going into another lockdown, right? Is there anything that technologies, AI can do for us? First thing first is the open data. So we want to make sure that all our data that we have collected so far, daily statistics, research papers, X-ray, CT scans, mobility data sets are hosted on COVID-19 AI website so that everybody's, not just the general public this time, right? Machine learning engineers, data scientists, they can all, and academic researchers, they can all come and access the data using this platform to help them to conduct their research. And the research that they are conducting somewhere along this direction, but not limited to, for example, epidemic curves, economic impacts, studying the cultural factors, demographic factors, climates and transportation network as well. These are some of the things that greatly affect our daily lives and also the economics of the country. And last but not least, when we are implementing this, we try to look into the problems that have top priorities, for example, recessions, depression, suicide, and also robbery cases as well. So these are the areas that we have identified. And thank you very much. I believe that together with technologies, with us working together, we'll win the battle. And don't forget to visit our websites and feel free to reach out to me via email or social media. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thanks, Dr. Han. And I have a couple of questions for you. Corona Tracker has been a mammoth effort in mobilizing volunteers globally. Tell me a little bit about how it all began, especially when we were in the beginning, in the early days of the pandemic itself. And how did you see the value for mobilizing these volunteers that early on?
I think it's more of the other way around, is that I'm really thankful that the volunteers, they see value in that project, because all I did was just posted two status messages, one on Facebook, one on LinkedIn, and that's all how it all started. And then people started responding to that, and we use different platforms like Telegrams, Slack, and also Trello to organize and make sure that everybody is allocated to tasks. And yeah, that's how we all began.
Right, and let's debunk a couple of myths and AI perspectives now that society is a lot more comfortable with the idea and even raison d'etre of contact tracing. Tell me, what are some of the myths that you in particular would like to debunk?
Yeah. So when we talk about contact tracing or big data, the first thing that comes into our mind is that, oh no, government is watching us. You know, the big brothers, the Facebook, Google, they're tracing us, and I don't want to give out my private information. I don't want to give out my personal information. But bear in mind that without you knowing or not, right? Writing down your name, your email, your phone numbers, and your temperature reading is not going to give out any more or any less information about yourself. All right, we're just doing our part as a citizen to help the country. When things happen, we can respond and react more effectively, right? And for example, we can have access to the GSM network, to the telco networks, to know where you have been, because you're always connected to the cellular network, right? And also people who are using Facebook, you're connected to the wireless network, all sort of information, your IP address, it can be easily be traced. It's just that when we are doing that, when we are doing our check-ins and contact tracing, this sort of action, right, it helps us to manage it easier, centralized by the relevant authority. So when they need to trace you, they need to contact you, say, hey, you might be in high risk, potentially high risk, and then you can be informed. It's not the other way around, right? The way big data works is by collecting a lot of small data. It's about connecting and collecting the dots. It's never about a single dot or what you have done and that will do anything to you. Yeah, so don't worry about that.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for breaking that down into simpler terms as well. And one last thing, Doctor. What else can we also be doing as we move into eased lockdowns regionally to ensure we still continue to stay safe from the possible second COVID-19 wave, not just in Malaysia, but regionally?
So I think this one goes back to the caution fatigue, and no matter how hard or how much we talk about it on the TV, on the media, that please wear the mask. You know, people sort of like they were in the mood. They were in a high density tension for the past 3 months. So it's like, I think from a more humanity standpoint, it's okay to relax a little bit when you are in a controlled situation. You know who you are with, you know where you are at, but we still need to make sure that when you are at somewhere that's public, that's very open, you don't know who came here before, where have you been, it's better to work together and trust the technologies that help us, right? Use MySejahtera, scan, make sure that if anything happens, we're able to manage to trace you, contact you, so that you take the right actions at the right time, at the earliest possible time. I think this is all we want with the help of technology.
Well explained. Thank you so much, Dr. Han. Now, from data analytics, we focus on the importance of communicating the story behind the numbers, what governments are doing to respond to the crisis. Media's role, of course, in managing and controlling the spread of the coronavirus and potentially saving lives cannot be overemphasized. And that's the difference made when the news is properly delivered to the public. Our next speaker thus is Reuters Southeast Asia editor Matthew Tosterin. Matthew has worked for more than 25 years with Reuters in Africa, the Middle East, Europe and Asia as a journalist and editorial manager. He moved to Bangkok in 2017 as bureau chief for Thailand and Vietnam. After spending a year dedicated to helping 2 Reuters journalists jailed over their work in Myanmar, he became editor for the whole of Southeast Asia in 2019, running Reuters coverage from across ASEAN countries. Matthew, over to you for your session now.
Thank you very much, Tamina. It's great to be here. Great session, great speakers. Yeah, for many of us, as for many people around the world, I mean, this is the biggest thing that we've faced in our lives. It's the biggest challenge. It's the biggest reporting challenge that we faced in our careers as things do. So the magnitude of that and the magnitude of the importance of our role as journalists in this, as people who can provide information that really matters to a global public that needs to understand a situation which even the scientists don't fully understand yet, can't be underestimated. So one of the first things that I wanted to note to start with was the extent to which the media, at a time that there have been sort of accusations of fake news, at a time that media's role has come in for questioning, the extent to which the media actually is trusted when it comes to providing information on the epidemic, on the coronavirus. This is a study which was done by the Reuters Institute in Oxford, surveyed around the world. And it shows the importance not only in terms of the media being able to help people understand what's going on, but also to sort of explain what they need to be doing about it, how they need to be able to help themselves and their communities and so on. And again, at a time when media has often been sort of questioned by different governments around the world, authoritarian states and others have in some cases made it more difficult for journalists to work. Again, it shows the importance here of news organizations in the rank of trusted people to be able to provide information about coronavirus. But one of the challenges for us, because it's the challenge for everybody globally, is to really understand what's actually going on. What are the facts? What should people be doing about it? What are the best things? What are the things that are recommended? So one of the first things that I thought I would highlight actually was the challenge over face masks. This was something which came up very early. And it shows the challenge for us and for all news organizations that are trying to provide fair, unbiased information as to sort of help guide people as to what the advice is. Now, the advice has changed, and a lot of people have sort of become much more used to wearing face masks, and in countries where they've been more and more generally have it seems, increasingly had lower rates of infection spread. But earlier in the crisis, there were countries such as Singapore that were telling people not to wear masks. There were countries that were telling people that they should be wearing masks. So our job really there has been very much to kind of try and present as fairly and accurately as we can the different perspectives on this, what different people are saying, and to be able to present the evidence in a way that people can know and understand and make their own judgments. So, as well as all of us having to understand suddenly more about medicine, about epidemics and how they spread, a lot of us have also had to start understanding data a lot better. And one of the challenges in every country is that we get very often the sort of daily data dump, which now goes out to everybody, and people are keen to sort of understand what it means. And one of our challenges is to try and explain what's going on in the data, to help people understand the situation in their particular country and so forth too. So my responsibility is across Southeast Asia, where the picture's been very different in different countries, where there are some countries that have much more quickly got on top of the problem, countries where that hasn't necessarily been the case as well, and where the epidemic continues to be much more clearly not under control. So the first slide that I was showing here is really just to show a little bit the evolution of the number of cases and things that we've had in the region, and the way that from that slow start, at one point people will remember that Malaysia actually had more cases than anywhere else, and then suddenly Singapore discovered that there were a lot of cases in its migrant worker dormitories, and that soared away. But underlying those, both Indonesia and the Philippines have actually, in the long term, it's become clear that they have, not only because they're large countries, far bigger problems than the rest of the region. Cases, of course, is very much dependent on testing. A clearer indicator possibly of the scale of the crisis in the region, and so one that we also have to present is the death rate, which is also to some extent dependent on testing as well. But here you can really sort of see both more clearly the challenge with the region of demonstrating how the problem continues to be much greater in Indonesia and the Philippines than anywhere else. But also you can see the challenge for understanding the data. When you look at the most recent data from the Philippines and the big spike that's happened, which has happened because of reporting of past data where they're catching up with the past data. So it's our job as journalists and our job at Reuters to try and help people understand, not just to know what the figures are, but what the interpretation is behind, so that they can see in which direction things are moving. And one of those things, of course, is the question of testing and the different testing rates around the region to show exactly why you're having more cases in more places. And as this shows, I mean, one of the reasons that Singapore has had so many cases is because it's done so much testing. Of course, Malaysia got the testing in hand quite quickly, and that's one of the reasons why, as others have mentioned too, it's been pretty successful compared to others in the region in terms of being able to tame the epidemic. Whereas, while the Philippines is caught up now, Indonesia still lags a long way behind. So given this lack of data and the difficulty that we've got with data, one of our challenges at Reuters has again been to try and see what we can do to try to help people understand what the real picture is. And sometimes that's meant going beyond the daily numbers that are announced by the governments and things too. So one of the things that we did fairly early on in Indonesia, when it became clear that the number of cases appeared far greater possibly than the official data showed, was to actually go to the authorities in Jakarta and find out how much the funeral services, how much the burials had increased. And it showed a massive increase. It's to help people understand by our reporting on the ground what the real difference is, and to help them understand better sometimes. This isn't just in Southeast Asia, of course, but globally, what the real picture might be behind the numbers and things that you see. Again, part of the challenge has been to sort of portray not just the impact of the virus itself, not just the numbers of people who might be suffering, who might be sick, the fatalities, but also the economic impact, and to be able to present that in a way that people can see. So, for instance, in this case, it's one of the ways that we were able to kind of present the impact of the movement control order in Malaysia, using data which came from Grab to show the extent to which the traffic jams had eased. Now, well, the traffic jams easing would be something which I'm sure any visitor to KL would welcome. The economic impact absolutely was not. And as mentioned before, that's a factor in future in what can happen in response to sort of future problems and things too. So for a further example of that, we also go to the Philippines, which had one of the world's toughest and longest lockdowns. In fact, the lockdown in Manila was just longer than the one that China imposed in Wuhan, and was extremely tough. But we're looking at the data also here to show the movement activity, but also what happened after you start to ease up, which is very much a sort of cautionary tale in what potentially happens. If you ease up on the lockdown, if you ease up on the punishing measures that you're taking, and which may not be economically sustainable, but the result may well be, if you're not careful, that you have a surge in the number of cases. So as mentioned before, as journalists, one of the things that we have to do is put safety first. I mean, we put safety first in everything we're doing, whether we're covering a war or whether we're covering a riot. And very much the same comes to covering coronavirus and things as well. A lot of us who report stories, of course, are working from home. We're using Zoom, we're using Skype, we're using different means to call people. But we at Reuters supply the world's broadcasters, the world's websites, everyone with television news images and with pictures and things as well. We can't do that from sitting behind desks. We can't do that from working from home. We have to go out there. We have to be in the hospitals. We have to be where things are happening. So there's a picture here of two of our team from Bangkok, actually, who were working in the coronavirus ward here. What it means for us is that we have to have very sort of strict rules about who goes on what assignments. We look at every assignment very carefully in terms of the news value. We have really strict protocols about what protective gear people have to wear. We have medical advice about how you do that, how you put on, how you take off the equipment so that you stay safe, how you keep your equipment clean. Sending people into quarantine for 14 days or so if they've been somewhere particularly risky as well, which of course makes it a challenge to manage a news organization where you have to be able to send people out at different times. But it is an essential part of what we do. So as well as that, of course, as journalists in the region, we've had other sort of difficult challenges to deal with. There's the challenge of information. There's the psychological challenge. A study showed that something like 70% of journalists covering coronavirus had suffered some sort of mental difficulties, a study which came out very recently. There's also the challenge sometimes from the authorities and things too. Colleagues at Al Jazeera, I know in Malaysia, have been questioned by police over a documentary that they produced. Whatever the rights or wrongs of a particular story, it's certainly worrying to see such developments when it comes to sort of issues of press freedom, and a time that governments around the world and around this region have sort of come down more harshly on the media in different places. But as well as reporting the sort of current developments, we have to look to the future as well. We have to look to what the next stages might be. A really important part of that, of course, has been the sort of search for the vaccine, the different vaccines which are out there, the competition between the different vaccines, the race to try and come first. And for us as a news organization, as a news organization that wants to provide factual and unbiased news, being very careful not to exaggerate, to base things on what the scientists are saying, to make clear when something has been peer-reviewed or when something hasn't been peer-reviewed, to put the different studies into the proper context and so forth is vital to be able to help people understand and not get the wrong impression of what the developments in the news that they see might be. And then, of course, in the long term, we have to report about the new world as it's become. We don't know how long it's going to last. Of course, we hope that these changes may be temporary. But the way that different people are living, the way that they're adapting to their lives, whether that's in the schoolroom or whether it's in a business, whether it's as journalists, whether it's hotels, and how things change in this new world that we live in. So a really important part of that is as we move on from the coronavirus and the immediate sort of impact of the disease, is helping people to sort of know and understand what's going on where they are and what's happening in other parts of the world.
Right. Thank you, Matthew. That was great insofar, very comprehensive as well. And I have a couple of questions for you, based also on some of the slides that you shared. Now, news organizations rated fourth with a 59% trust regarding COVID-19 information. Do you feel, from a Reuters perspective, this does bode well for future news and trustworthiness trends, or is it something that is basically just a phenomenon caused due to the pandemic and increased concerns over health and safety?
I think that's a very important and interesting question, Tamina. I do think that it's something which bodes well for the future as well. In recent years, we've had a lot of assaults on the media from governments and others who've sort of challenged us, who've sort of described us as fake news and wanted to put in place sort of different rules in different places to be able to limit what we do. And I think it shows the importance of the media. I think it shows that there is a great deal of trust from the public still in the media as being able to provide the information. Particularly if you drill down further in that data, actually, I didn't show all the data, but there's particular trust in news organizations that don't have a particular point of view or aren't seen as having a particular point of view. Those who don't come with any particular political spin. But in a world where your choices are to listen to what governments or politicians might tell you, or to listen to what you might see on social media, the role of organizations that do provide accurate, vetted, edited information, I think are more important than ever, and I think that this helps to show that.
That's right. Now also, Matthew, despite 60% who were polled agreeing that media has made them understand the crisis and the challenges of COVID-19 better, at the same time, what about addressing the 32% who believe that media has exaggerated the impact? It's always about also reaching that target population who disbelieves the media off the bat, and even ethical media.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we have a duty to make sure that we are putting things in perspective, and that absolutely that we're not exaggerating things. Of course, this is a survey of media across the board rather than any sort of specific media. But I think we absolutely have that duty to make sure that people don't see us exaggerating. That when we're reporting, we are reporting the facts and the context that we can put around them. And that's a challenge for us often when we're dealing with science and we're dealing with scientific subjects that we may not be experts in. Where we have to speak to experts who may well disagree themselves. But that's part of the job, and that's part of our duty as journalists to be able to do that, so that we can provide that really important public service, and make sure that people understand that it's about providing information that can help and not sensationalizing.
That's right. And one last one, Matthew. Vaccine development will be and is already the new arena of misinformation, snake oil cures, and what have you. How is Reuters approaching this challenge for the media?
Well, the way that we report it is the same way that we have to report anything else, is to is using particularly our expert scientific correspondence to be able to look at what's actually being announced, what's coming out in terms of the development, not rushing to judgment, being very careful about who's announcing what when, being able to put things in perspective of the degree of reviews that it's had, the degree of peer review a particular study might have had, to be able to look at how things are being tested, where things are being tested, which stage of vaccine trials they're at, and to be able to sort of also put these things, I think, which is particularly important in this context as well at this time, is to put that in context of what would normally happen with the vaccine development, and the length of time that it also takes. Because it's also important that we bear in mind that people are trying to rush through the process of vaccine development, of course, obviously, but to help people understand that this isn't something which also happens overnight, and that it's a process, a scientific process, which still actually requires a lot of testing, a lot of work, a lot of research to be done before there's something which can be released, hopefully, to the public broadly. And might then change all our lives again and make things return to a new normal that's a bit more normal.
That's right. Thank you so much, Matthew. We'll get back to you together with all the other panelists after broaching this last segment of our webinar session, discussing new norms in not just journalist safety, but threats to media freedom and how we can respond to not just this pandemic, but possible others more effectively in years to come. Joining us now for the final session is CNN Indonesia's director and senior anchor, Desi Anwar. Now, Desi is a writer and journalist based in Jakarta, a pioneer news anchor, producer, and talk show host with almost 3 decades of experience under her belt. Desi is currently director and senior anchor of the digital news channel CNN Indonesia. She hosts an in-depth talk show, Insight with Desi Anwar, interviewing prominent newsmakers, both national and international, on a variety of current issues. Hi, Desi. Welcome to the session. How are you?
Hi, Tamina. Thank you very much for the kind introductions. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for the brilliant presentations. And I think we've really learned a lot in this webinar so far.
Desi, please continue, and the floor is now yours. Thank you for being with us, everybody.
Well, I think what I would like to focus more on the role of the media to educate the public. As Matthew mentioned, I think 60% of people still regard the news media as very much a source of credible information. So I think we do have a responsibility to make sure that we continue to give good, accurate, factual information, especially when it comes to dealing with something as difficult and complicated as COVID-19. Most of us, we don't really understand what it's about, and also there is a lot of things that we need to learn ourselves. And let me just share my screen. I hope I can do this quite well. Okay. All right. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can, Desi.
Okay. So I'd like to focus on educating the public, particularly in Indonesia. Like I said, the media plays a very important role. And obviously, the challenges for Indonesia, not like countries like Malaysia and Singapore and all the other ASEAN and Asian countries. We are a country, a huge country of 270 million people. We're heterogeneous in terms of socioeconomic and cultural profiles, and we're also still developing, so we have challenges with unequal and inadequate public medical and health services and infrastructure. We are a democracy with a relatively free press, and this has, of course, its pros and cons as well. Currently, we have 12 national commercial TV channels, all competing for airtime. We also have hundreds of local channels and obviously countless of digital news outlets. So if we talk about a crisis like a pandemic in Indonesia, we also have what's called a pandemic of information, because the internet penetration currently in Indonesia is getting higher and higher by the year. As of January 2020, there's already 64% of internet penetration, which amounts to around 176 million people. We are one of the world's largest social media users, with 160 million social media users as of the beginning of January, with Most people have more than one mobile phone, so we have over 124% of mobile connections, which is now probably a little bit more than 340 million mobile connections. So when we have a pandemic like this of a global scale and a national scale, it can create a huge health, social, and economic problems. And it also doesn't help that, I mean, the COVID-19 came to Indonesia quite late. It came in the beginning of March. And so there was this kind of, discussions about how is it that in Indonesia we are not still having, the data on COVID-19. We have a minister of health that did not really help because the attitude is to take COVID-19 sort of lightly and saying it's more, it can cure, it's not, it's like a common cold and it's something that can be cured by itself. And also, the government, this is a cartoon that says that Indonesia's attitude when it comes to COVID, the whole of the world is shutting down, but Indonesia is actually inviting everybody to come and visit Indonesia because they see it as a sort of an opportunity to improve or to increase the tourism into the country. And there's this kind of, perhaps wishful thinking that yes, maybe because in Indonesia we have things like herbals, the jamus, and people's immune systems are different here. And also because it's a tropical country, the coronavirus may not survive in the heat, and also maybe because we have all these other diseases, so we're naturally immune. But of course, when we had our first case of COVID, and it happened because somebody, got themselves tested because they, wondered whether they were having the COVID-19. And suddenly we actually have a first official COVID test, and this is around the 2nd or the 3rd of March. And then people start thinking, well, maybe there has been no evidence in Indonesia because no testing has been done. And of course, this creates some kind of, and this happened in Jakarta, and I think there was all sorts of reactions. There was a little bit of panic buying in some areas, particularly when, in times of crisis, people don't know, what's going to happen, what does it mean, and so on and so forth. We see some panic buying here, and also there's some of the early TV stations, covering the story outside of the first COVID cases, wearing sort of these huge masks, and it's they got a lot of social media negative comments about fear mongering. So there was a real sense of, like I said, pandemic of information. People got very paranoid, and some people, on the other hand, other areas of Indonesia, for example, this show of a lack of concern. If anything, they see it more as like an urban problem. COVID-19, it's very much a Jakarta thing, and it's also for the well-off people who have contact with the outside world, and the rest of Indonesians wouldn't get it. So we see, for example, religious gatherings still going on and in various parts of Indonesia. And also there is this kind of, yes, we can fight this together, but they don't quite actually understand, how to do it. And there's this image that you see here is declaring, this is in Tegal, saying that they are going to fight the coronavirus. And as you can see, there's absolutely no social distancing going on here whatsoever. And of course, we have a government that is criticized for not only being very slow in anticipating the arrival of the coronavirus, but not yet understanding how to deal with it. This is a press conference that we're all invited to when they're importing supplies from the PPE, the personal protective equipment, and they're so proud the fact that they are importing these supplies. But what happened was the whole place was so packed with journalists that we decided, no, this can't go on. It's a danger to us, and so we started refusing to.
Right. There was a slight technical hitch on the audio side of things. Desi, please continue. Please continue, Desi.
Which is, down who has the right to lock down a particular area. Is it the central government, or is it the provincial government, or is it the municipal government? And there's a feeling that perhaps the government is more interested in pursuing and making sure that the economy doesn't collapse. And then on the other hand, some of the people are saying, look, this is about health issues, that they should put health concerns first. So there's all sorts of these kinds of discussions going on that shows that there is a difficulty in coordinating such a huge task force here. And there's also this polemic about, about travels. And of course, if you remember, it happens during the Ramadan season, the fasting month. And of course, a lot of people at the end of the fasting month, they normally like to go back to their home villages. And by this time, of course, many people who have lost their jobs in Indonesia and are migrant workers, they all want to go back to their villages because they have nothing to keep them here. But at the same time, at the end of the fasting season, it's a tradition for people to go back to the villages. So there's a polemic of, can people go back at the end of fasting season for the Hari Raya, or can they just go back because there's no job in Jakarta? And also, if the roads are being shut or if people are being checked, what about people who are flying? Because people can still fly. And of course, like I mentioned before, the central government and versus local government, they use it also as a political sort of, one-upmanship of, we see here, for example, in Jakarta, the provincial, the governor wants to lock down or wants to keep everybody safe in Jakarta, but he can't really do it without the agreement of the central government, because you can't prevent people from moving or mobilizing or coming into the capital. And of course, there's lots of these around, hoax and misinformation. We in CNN Indonesia were also victims of, hoax, where people screen capture our, our screen, and then they sort of change the chirons, they change the subtitles, and then they present it as something else. So we have to do a lot of damage control. And all of these things are going on, particularly because Indonesia has a large use of the social media. Now, things started to kind of, get really serious when one of the ministers also got COVID. And here I have the video of the president of Indonesia, President Jokowi, telling people to basically start practicing social distancing. He's saying, don't be afraid of coronavirus. So what he's trying to do is reassure people that as long as you stick to certain measures, such as washing your hands. So this is the president of Indonesia himself. He goes out of his way to show that these are the kinds of things that people have to be doing. And I think this is something that in Indonesia, people are quite more, compared to the United States, for example, are much more compliant when it comes to, following public sort of orders like this. And then as you can see, the government's beginning to do this, is their corona, shake hands using their elbows. And then because of the, our feedback as well of not wanting to attend live, physical press conferences, they start doing their webinars online, and they have their cabinet meetings online. So it's basically showing to the entire country that this is the way to do things. And that COVID is, and one of our ministers, unfortunately, and it became quite a meme saying, that COVID-19 is something that you just have to put up with and have to live with. So it's like living with your wife, and also this meme came, and you just have to, it won't go away, you just have to put up with it, and you just have to cope with it. So I like this one. This is the 5 stages of responses to COVID in Indonesia. And it says, they start off with denial, and then anger, and then depression, and then bargaining, and now acceptance. And I think we are at the stage of accepting, and it's called now the new normal, because basically everybody has to start changing their habits. And now I think educating the public is a very important part for the media, because the thing about this COVID-19 is all to do with personal discipline. It's all, if you're not disciplined, that's when you're going to get the virus. So you have to really, really hone on the fact that everybody, you have to wear a mask, you have to wash your hands, you have to have your physical distancing, and you have to make sure that you eat healthy, because this is very much a virus that is human to human. So we ended up having to learn a lot about the virus itself. And we have to be instant experts, especially since the task force really relies on the journalists and the official media to be the public educator. And so all of us, the national media, both online, television, the press, we got together and we got this, put together this campaign called the Media Against COVID-19. And as with the CNN, this is our contribution. So we produced a series of public service announcements on COVID-19, what it is, and how dangerous it is, and what it is that you have to do in order to protect yourself and your family. And this is all done at the same time. So I think this is one of the very, very good examples where the media, whatever platforms, and despite our differences, we got together and we said, look, we need to do something. Indonesia is such a big country, and I think this is part of our journalistic responsibility. So we produce a series of these, which we air from time to time, and this is a poster that is also done by some of the press media. This basically says, Jangan mudik, don't go back home for the Hari Raya, because it's going to be, basically you're bringing back to your hometowns the disease. As you remember, in Jakarta is still very much the epicenter, so the trick is now to prevent the spread from going to the other side of Indonesia, to the regions, because if that happens, they have less public health facilities there, less hospitals, less medical facilities, less doctors and less nurses and so on. So it's really crucial for Jakarta, for Indonesia, to keep it in the epicenter in Jakarta. And of course, a lot of people still did go back. Around 2 million people went back home. And now, as we can see, there's more and more cases in East Java. Now, we do a daily COVID-19 update. Of course, if you look at the data, there's also discussion about the veracity of the data. We have the official data that's produced by the government. And of course, we can only update based on the government, the official figures. But as like Matthew mentioned, around April, I think the number of funerals that happened in Jakarta actually rose significantly. So we also have to be very careful about data, and we try to make sure that the government gives us good data. But I think this is something that is still a problem. And this is also another example of educating the public on how to make sure that we don't get infected. So it's all about having to clean the surfaces, and so these are the kinds of things that we do both on television and also on our online platform, and the new normal protocol. And you can't do enough of this, because even now, especially after 5 months, there seems to be sort of like a COVID fatigue, which is unfortunate, because the numbers are actually not going away. If anything, it's increasing in Jakarta. So what we're seeing now is that back in March, April, May, you have in terms of the fear, or in terms of the concern, and in terms of the stress, is quite high when it comes to the pandemic. But on the other hand, now the numbers are actually much higher. We now have more than almost 90,000 cases. But the level of fear and the level of concern is actually a lot less, and people seem to be more relaxed. Just very quickly, this is some of the people that are interviewed in my program. And of course, what I try to do is educate myself, particularly, as well as my public, by interviewing only people with credible information. And these are, for example, the head of Indonesia's COVID task force. And he's the one who's supposed to know how to, the strategy of Indonesia in dealing with the COVID. And of course, scientists and epidemiologists, virologists, these are people that we turn to in these times of COVID, as well as scientists and researchers and developers. So Indonesia is now developing some, ventilators and protective equipment. And of course, policymakers, making sure that, we know and we criticize, making sure that the government is on the right track when it comes to keeping not just Indonesia's health, but also the economy healthy. Religious leaders, this is also extremely important because a lot of the problem is that during the Ramadan season and everybody wants to go to, they want to go to the mosque, for example, they want to do the Tarawih, the fasting prayers, and then they want to go back to their villages and they want to, have a large gathering, and basically that's not allowed, and that's quite hard. So you have to keep telling people that it's best to stay at home, and religious leaders are best at doing that. And also we have to raise awareness that this COVID, although, it attacks everybody, but the impact is not the same. Some people are much more vulnerable, not just in terms of their age, but also their social economic conditions. So we do a lot on solidarity movements, fundraisers, and also the impact to companies. A lot of the companies have to shut down and lay off their people. And this is also a very important part, I think, of the conversation. It's on mental health and well-being. So I do a lot of this, making sure that people are reminded that, we're all in this together and we have to keep ourselves healthy, both mentally as well as physically. And just very quickly, appreciation to those who are frontliners. And we like doing this because it really creates an atmosphere of hope and positivity, of that we're in it together, and that everybody, should be involved, and nobody shouldn't take this lightly, because if you don't wear your mask, if you don't keep your social distancing, you're putting your frontliners at risk. And of course, the media, we want to show them that, it's important for us to keep working 24 hours. And when we actually, when we go out, we actually have to wear our protective clothing, and we have to make sure that we only send people to... And we're very careful about keeping safety, which is #1 in the media. But it's far from over, even though now it's what we call, we're entering the new normal phase. But as the economy, it seems that the government prefers to ease the lockdown in order not to exacerbate the situation. The problem with Indonesia, it's obviously the testing. This is something that from the beginning has been a problem. Even now, with 270 people, a million people, our testing capacity at the moment, it's only 10,000 people per day, which is well below what is needed. I think we need around at least 30,000 a day. And as I mentioned before, the capacity for the testing is very different in Jakarta, and whereas now most of the cases are outside of Jakarta. So this is something I think Indonesia still has a long way to go. We were talking earlier about, flattening the curve, but I don't think we've reached the curve, let alone the second wave. We're still dealing with the first wave, and I think more testing needs to be done, more tracing, and also more treatment. As of today, the numbers, this is almost 90,000 with a recovery of almost 49,000 and the death of over 4,320. Again, this is the data that's probably just the tip of the iceberg, but as you can see, the fatality rate in Indonesia compared to other countries in the region is pretty high. But we're allowed back to work. You've got to remember, avoid men. Don't touch your mouth, eyes, and nose. Instead, follow women. Wash your hands, obey social distancing, mask up, exercise, and eat well, and no unnecessary traveling. So that's about it. So Mina, from my side.
Thank you, Desi. That was the most insightful session overall. I love the fact that CNN Indonesia has also been working on so many simple, easy to understand, not just graphics, but powerful and impactful visuals that really get to the core of the matter. Now, I have a few questions for you, Desi, right before we moved into bringing on the full lineup of speakers to take some audience questions from everybody who has been tuning into the webinar, who's registered and has asked questions throughout. Desi, now the role of the media has been not just highlighted while simultaneously being under fire like never before. Tell us about how things are in your newsroom at CNN Indonesia and what's keeping things nimble, but at the same time helping you all be actionable rather than reactionary, particularly in this non-stop news cycle when it comes to COVID. Nothing's ever been as non-stop as this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is really, really important because, you know, a lot of people say that this COVID-19 is a pandemic, but there's this pandemic of information. People are bombarded with so many, it's just too much information, and you can't tell the difference what is right and what is wrong, especially in Indonesia, where a lot of people, more and more people actually get their news online. This is time for us in the mainstream media, in the official media, to really, really make sure that we present accurate reporting. We, in CNN Indonesia, we have what's called our standards and practices. So we make sure everything that we put on air, every picture, every video, it's accurate. We do a lot of fact checking. And the other thing is because of the misinformation, because you don't know whether what you get on the social media is true or not, more and more people are actually, you know, looking at us to provide the correct information, to provide information that is not only accurate but responsible. And I think responsibility in this instance is a very important part as well, especially here in Indonesia, where it's very easy to fan an already, you know, bad situation and making it worse by sensationalizing it. So we're very careful not to sensationalize. We stick to the facts. We ask the right people. We stick to experts, and also, if there are, for example, misinformation, we're very quick to say, you know, this is hoax. And then if we do say the wrong thing, we're very, very quick in order to rectify the information. So I think, yes, it's very crucial at this time that people get the right information. And the thing is, it's even more crucial because there's so many different things that even scientists and experts, they don't agree on now, you know, whether COVID is just droplets or is it airborne or it's this and that. So, you know, it's not an easy thing for us to cover. So we try to do it the best we can. Kamina?
That's right. Thank you so much, Desi. Now, those were absolutely eye-opening insights and reminders for always not just upholding professional standards, but news ethics. We now bring in all our speakers to join not just Desi, but also myself on screen for a Q&A session from everyone who has been joining us for this webinar. Let's welcome back Sulin, Anuradha, Dr. Han Lau, Matthew Tosteven, as well as, of course, Desi back on. Right. So let's bring on everybody together, and I've got a couple of questions for starters. Now for starters, this one's actually targeted towards Dr. Han. A question from the audience, Dr. Han. Simple understanding of statistics, a bigger number of sampling within a defined population would produce more accurate results. And one of the webinar participants asked whether this should be the direction in which regional governments actually go to also be helping with the work that Corona Tracker has been doing. Let's bring in Dr. Han. Is he on standby? All right, Dr. Han, were you able to hear the earlier question? Right, we're experiencing a slight technical delay. Let's just check back in with Dr. Han.
I'm back. Sorry, can you please repeat the question again?
Absolutely. So, Dr. Han, this was a question for you regarding also how Corona Tracker does its work. And a member of the webinar registration said a simple understanding of statistics, a bigger number of sampling within a defined population would produce more accurate results. So should regional governments actually be pushing to reach the maximum testing capacity, in your opinion?
The problem here is that we can't really get a meaningful sample size. Like a lot of time when we look at it, like we define clusters as a posterior outcome. It's not something a priori. You can't really identify because it's more of a network analysis problem rather than just a simple statistical issue. Because you until today, at the point that we are speaking, right, we can't really know is that a particular age group, is that a particular type of ethnicity, or is it because of your demographics? So the only thing that we know is that the way that the virus spread is pretty much related to your behavior, your activities, like for example, don't avoid the crowd, that sort of things. But it doesn't really help if we really zoom down to a particular group of people statistically. So, and that's why if you look at the analysis, right, not that many people has studied or has actually found any kind of significance in that sort of area. Yeah.
Right. Thanks for that, Dr. Han. Now, a question for Matthew regarding Reuters, and how did the idea to check the funeral numbers in Indonesia come about? Was it based on previous experience, Matthew?
Yeah, hi, Tamina. Sorry, just unmuting there.
No worries.
Well, it wasn't really based on previous experience because we didn't really have this experience in other places before. I mean, of course, in other countries, I know that in Iran, which sort of suffered, which suffered a sort of earlier epidemic, that was something people had looked at. But it's part of our job and it's part of our duty as well to be trying to look at all these areas, to be able to sort of bring the extra insight and things where we can. And part of that comes through speaking to a lot of people as well. So I believe in this case that we'd heard from somebody that this was going on, and of course we're close to the ground with our photographers, our video journalists and things. So we were then able to go and check through the data and find that this was the case and that there was this huge leap, which of course has continued. And then to get commentary from, I mean, in that case, the governor as well, who himself said that he could see no other explanation for this than coronavirus, given the huge leap that had happened. In fact, one of the things that you see in Indonesia, and a subsequent story reported as well, is Indonesia has a whole category of patients, unlike most other countries, of people who are classified as PDP, which means those who are, to all intents and purposes, seem to have coronavirus, but haven't actually tested positive. In some cases, because they've not been tested. In some cases, the test doesn't come through before they died. If you actually include the deaths from those people as well, then you can actually see across Indonesia, the death toll, sadly, is far, far higher than the official figures as well.
Right. Thanks for that, Matthew. Now, the next question from the webinar participants is directed towards Desi and CNN Indonesia. Desi, they ask, how does mainstream news media like CNN Indonesia also compete with aggressive social media pages and websites that are often the source of a lot of misinformation and fake news?
Yes, I mean, with great difficulty, because obviously in Indonesia, although we do have a lot of digital news outlets, you know, the official news outlets online, there's also so many sources of, you know, hello? That are not clear where they come from. So I think this is where official media like CNN Indonesia and like journalists with code of conduct, with code of ethics, and we are accountable. And in this instance, our association, press associations, we're very, very strict when it comes to ensuring that the news that we deliver is accurate. But then on the other hand, we also get a lot of criticism from the government, obviously, saying that we're exaggerating things and making things worse, sensationalizing, and that, they try to insist or make sure that we sort of do cover things that highlights the government's efforts when it comes to eradicating COVID-19. So it's quite you have to walk quite a thin line here. So on the one hand, you have a government that wants to make sure that everybody complies when it comes to the COVID, the health protocols, and then people that are very, very critical. So what I see, especially in Indonesia, because we have a relatively free press, there is this balance you have to keep between making sure that your freedom of expression is not, the government's not going to take it away. On the other hand, we also have to make sure that there shouldn't be freedom of misinformation. So this is something that we still are struggling. But I think in cases like COVID-19, more and more people are actually tuning in to our websites and to the television because they are looking for the correct information. And although it may not translate to more advertising revenue, but we have seen viewership spike up. We have seen people actually, going online, and we have more eyeballs when it comes to COVID-19. So we take that very, very seriously because it is a responsibility. And I think this is something that we mustn't forget, because we are dealing with people's lives. We are dealing with what's happening in the country, and there's no room for us to make mistakes, I think, in this instance.
That's right. Thanks so much, Desi. So I think it's really important that we emphasize not just the role of media, but also the huge balancing act, almost a trapeze act in some regional media outlets, whereby it is about disinformation, misinformation, versus also getting the truth out there. Now, I'd like to move into Anuradha. Also on the positive side of things, and this was also something you mentioned during your earlier session, Anuradha, how has journalists' mental health while reporting and working from home during the pandemic become a core issue that organizations, including Bloomberg, have been actively addressing, and perhaps something which was possibly rarely, if ever, discussed in pre-pandemic times?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. How's the audio, Anuradha? Okay?
Yep, good. I just had my earphones just now, but I think you weren't able to hear me.
No problem.
So the question about mental health and well-being, I think, is something that a lot of news organizations at their start, including especially the ones in this part of the region, didn't see it as something that's going to be so critical in how the day-to-day things go on in the newsroom. It's very easy to forget that the people that are bringing the news to you and the news that you're seeing on your television screen or reading on your phone actually was produced by a human being that have health issues, have mental health issues, and it was really critical for a lot of news organizations to really take a step back and address that. And the person's mental health is really indicative of how they are going to perform and their ability to perform as a journalist as well. One of the things actually that I wanted to add on a little bit to what Desi was saying about social media, if I may, Tamina, I think it comes down also to relevance, credibility, and fact checking. Um, as someone sitting in Malaysia, I've seen how social media has been so critical in spreading news across Southeast Asia and also the world. And a lot of news organizations, they use social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Line to reach the wider audience, to increase readership, and also to increase digital subscription. But the problem is social media has also been used as a platform to spread unwanted or fake news. And the question going forward for us, and I think for a lot of people in industry, including in Malaysia, is how the issues on fake news will be resolved or at least regulated in order that news published is based on facts. However, it's something that I feel we need to proceed with very carefully, especially if we're looking at things like reforming laws on the right to information or regulating the media. Because as Desi rightfully pointed out, while there's a need to stop fake news or misinformation, press freedom is also an issue. And I believe that a news article should not be labeled fake because it's touching on a sticky or sensitive subject, and of course, it's addressing tough questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well expressed, Anuradha. Thanks for that. From there, I'd like to move into Bu Sulin, Editor-in-Chief with Code Blue, Malaysia. Sulin, I wanted to ask you, now overall, do you feel that media outlets in Malaysia, and particularly also those focusing on health news, have found new ways to connect with society to disseminate impactful news during the pandemic? And what areas for improvement in particular do you see? What opportunities are there?
So I run a health news startup. So we're very small. My editorial team is just me, two other writers. So yeah, as you can see, we are really small. But during at the height of the pandemic in Malaysia, our viewership has spiked, as I'm sure the viewership across all Malaysian news outlets have spiked as well. I do believe, though, that of course journalists were supposed to be impartial, and I think I agree very much with Anuradha about how we do need a right to information law. Of course, there's a lot of fake news out there on social media, but I don't think regulation, enacting a law or regulation is the best way to curb it. I think what's more helpful, especially during a pandemic, is for the media to continue doing what we do best, which is just delivering news reports, which could be, like Anuradha said, it could be touchy, sensitive, it may be something that the government doesn't like, but we don't. As journalists, we don't have our own personal opinion, right? We report what people say, what different stakeholders say. So I believe that one of the ways to curb fake news is for journalists to engage with our readers. So I've tried to do that at Code Blue. When readers mention something, then I try to address any questions that they have, because I believe that we don't necessarily have to just step away as a neutral party, but engage people, engage with readers about any criticisms that they have or any questions that they have. And similarly, likewise, the government really shouldn't, shut down any news reports that may be unfavorable to the official narrative, because this is going to make things worse. They should instead increase transparency and give data and information requested by journalists, so that we can report those things.
Thank you, Sulin, for highlighting the role of the Fourth Estate, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. And thank you to all our speakers also for making the time today in the midst of the ongoing pressure of the daily COVID-19 news cycles. So, of course, I'd also like to, at this juncture, thank all our webinar participants as well as our online viewers who've been so active in sharing comments as well as questions with us. We didn't have the time, of course, to address each one of those concerns. And COVID-19, of course, has been described as the virus that took fewer than 100 days to shut down the world. Medical frontliners kept us healthy and saved lives, but the media and journalists upheld our profession through striving for the highest ethical and professional standards available while covering the news cycle. We're not out of danger yet, and a clearer picture has emerged of the kind of societies we need to build to withstand similar pandemics in the future. The challenges and lessons of COVID-19 coverage have broken, yet also reassembled with sharp focus the media's will and purpose as the Fourth Estate. We hope you found these sessions informative and take back with you actionable solutions not only for your own newsrooms, but also knowledge on how to continue holding the line against the tide of misinformation, not just in these extraordinary times, but during all times. It's been a pleasure taking you through this Bernama webinar on COVID-19, New Norms for Journalists, a Regional Perspective. I'm Tamina Kausji, your host and moderator. Until the next one, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay informed.